Let's start with the most important part first. In Watch Dogs 2, a poof of dirt comes out of the ground when you shoot it. Oh my god, they figured it out! The first game wasn't a bad game by its own sake, but it was a painfully derivative one. The promise of a hackable open world that you move through using social stealth mechanics gave way to an easier focus on combat and explosions that turned it into a conventional sandbox shooter, where the viability of playing it with a more unique playstyle depended on the density of hackables that the level designers could cram in there. There were, like, 4 really good story missions out of the whole package where that hacking and stealth smoothie really worked, but the rest was a poor man's GTA thanks to an underwhelming amount of polish, as exemplified by dirt that didn't poof out of the ground when you shot it. It didn't help that 2014 was the year when the Ubisoft sandbox game formula became noticeable and unbearable. I remember climbing a lot of towers that year, and now that Watch Dogs is back with its depressingly inflated wages, so are all those towers. But there's a trick they used to make it a little more bearable this time. At the top of those towers are usually quest objectives, money bags, or upgrade points. They're not mandatory for unlocking your fast travel and optional activities. Instead, all those little Ubisoft Sandbox fun icons are quickly pasted on there en masse after a couple story missions, which makes for a much more fun gameplay loop. There's not much holding you to those towers. If you get tired of looking for a nearby scissor lift to climb them, just stop and fast travel to a more fun mission literally anywhere else on the map. But that also makes for a game with much less direction and focus than the first. The whole city of San Francisco is your sandbox once you beat the tutorial level, without a feeling of progressing from place to place as the story advances. You begin the game in your underwear all the way across the bay in Sausalito, and objective number 1 asks you to make your way across the whole map without knowing how to call a taxi or how severe this flavor of Grand Theft Auto punishes Grand Theft Auto. So you learn by doing, and probably by causing billions of dollars of property and medical damage in the process, because Watch Dogs is wacky now. If there's one aspect that took a complete 180 from the first game, it's the tone. The original's edgy, timely, and relevant themes of
personal data collection, how you think, what you believe.
Who is really managing the world we are in?
What would you do with that kind of power?
are now just pretensions because Watch Dogs has turned into something that feels more like a Saints Row spin-off exclusively focusing on the Deckers from Saints Row 3. Our heroes are a misfit gang of hacker stereotypes trying so hard to be cool it hurts, until you pass a cringe curve here. Scissor Lifter Simulator 2 reeks of old people trying to be hip, a trait the first game was singed with, but here they just went all out with it. The writers themselves have seemed to accept that CTOS is the dumbest idea for city infrastructure ever. They saw everyone cringing at default and DedSec in the first games and gave everyone who was cringing a big FU by replacing them with even more cringy kids who wear LED masks and speak in snarky sarcasm and post their dank maymays all over their walls. I was ready to hate these guys over the first few hours. No one talks like this. No one looks like this. What is their story? What are their jobs? How do they make enough money to fund this place? Where are their families? It's ridiculous. But you gotta hand it to persistence. There's something about the sheer bravado of this game's style, how aggressively, self-deprecatingly, self-aware the creative vision behind it all is, that at some point, it became adorable. I gradually came to love these guys for the fantasy they represent. Coming away loving the character designs of John Deere's Pro Scissor Lifter 3 was the last thing I expected to get here, but here we are. Your crew is a beautifully animated, beautifully modeled adult fantasy of youth, so unapologetically cheesy that they ripen into juicy, gratifying camp. If anything else, whether people love them or hate them, I think people will at least agree that these characters truly are pieces of concept art come to life. And that process of defying expectations is why I think I ended up enjoying this sarcasm sandbox way more than the recent Saints Row games. When the fun throttles are at 100% all the time, it kinda cheapens the value of all that fun you're supposed to be having, whereas Watch Dogs 2 can at least pretend to be a little grounded in reality. San Francisco is a real-ass American city after all. The game has the pretenses of happening in our own world, even though what is happening is monumentally absurd. So imagine me coming into this blind with fresh memories of the shamefully gritty first game.
In a world where technology connects everything. I'm not looking for justice, goddammit.
And then finding out how fast we've moved away from the chilly grit of Chicago to sunny California. If there was any one city in America inclusive enough to house this crazy of a costume party, it would of course be San Francisco. When you're not watching cutscenes of people looking and speaking incomprehensibly, you may be barreling a nitrous-boosted dirt bike over the hills into the Scientology headquarters, taking a selfie on the way for extra follower fun points, and then hacking the phones of guards who will stop what they're doing in the middle of combat to check their text messages. So many parts of the Ubisoft sandbox game formula have been redesigned here to involve more expressive player engagement. Checking in at landmarks is done via selfie pictures with you in full control of the process to make something that looks silly as a creative fun reward on top of the boring currency reward. Cars turn on a dime and barrel forwards with rocket acceleration even before you unlock a nitrous boost inexplicably enabled for every vehicle in the game, so getting from point A to B certainly is more exciting. The NPCs are a hell of a lot livelier too, with some over-the-top idle animations spawning in for the occasionally violent pedestrians, and a gang warfare system that can have you triggering conflicts between factions to create distractions for you to sneak through or facilitate a slick getaway when things get out of hand. Which points to a design philosophy that Watch Dogs 2 sticks to solve the problem of the unique potential of its gameplay being hampered by level design not being diligent enough. Instead of ramping up the density of hackables per square foot, the developers rather increased the amount of player actions per hackable, while also giving you 2 drones to pilot through different areas while you're at it. Since this is the Watch Dogs universe, where all it takes to hack into a system is line of sight, that means you have 3 different angles of hackable visibility to work with, all player placed, which really helps every story mission feel like those 4 good story missions of the first game. Thanks to those drones, there's far more opportunities to break into a location remotely, entirely ghosting your way through a mission without ever being seen or even setting foot outside of a van parked outside of the place you're supposed to sneak through, or blast through. Oftentimes via a spectrum of methods that feel much wider than the stealth versus ultra-violence binary that developers often force. For example, one later game mission wants me to destroy objectives behind enemy lines, either by quietly hacking them up close with a drone or personally blasting my way through and blowing them all up. But I was sticking to a non-lethal playstyle and was also in a hurry. So guess what works? Sticking explosives onto drones while creating distant distractions to lure guards away from the danger. And when I figured this out and got away with it, I felt like the genius hacker anarchist the game wanted me to feel like. The possibility of a non-lethal stealth playstyle is there, and playing the game like that makes it feel unique, which is the potential the first was hitting at, but the second game here still doesn't go full ham and embrace that. Which is why I want to ask a shocking, revolting question that's probably way more offensive to the developers than it should be. What if... Oh my god, hear me out here. What if they got rid of guns entirely? I mean, I'm not talking about the NPCs not having guns. You still need a real threat to sneak yourself around, but I think the game would make way more sense if you couldn't just 3D print yourself an entire arsenal. Think of the restraint towards gunplay that Sleeping Dogs had. This could have happened, easily. The key here is the unlockable distraction button, which makes a stealthy, non-lethal playstyle super viable, almost too easy in fact. Because after that point, you never really need to switch away from the taser. You start with it from the beginning and it functions more or less like the tranquilizer from MGS. It's a short-range sleeping dart that knocks folks out cold. Combine that with the distraction button that pretty much blinds enemies for a couple seconds, and you have an overpowering stealth combo that refocuses the player's playstyle towards the more entertaining gameplay that a hackable open world with social stealth mechanics presents. The process of learning how to play non-lethally was kind of confusing thanks to a melee attack that's way more lethal than the animation looks, but once I discovered that distraction button and switched to only using the taser, Scissor Lifter Slaughter 7 became a legitimately good game. Fact is, once I changed the rules and stuck to a peaceful, stealthy playstyle, I had way more fun with it. Tasing an incoming search party and then dashing away from their stormtrooper quality gunfire and making a slick getaway in an unidentified car pulled into a quiet alley just feels so good. There's way more mischievous comedy gameplay to be had, racking up a more indirect body count through remote-controlled cars, fraudulent gang wars, and booby traps set to trigger unfortunate accidents, all of which are undermined by pointing and clicking on the bad guys until they go away. So think of the resources the devs could have allotted for features other than this huge list of guns you don't need and probably won't even want. I'd rather have a crouch button, I'd rather have the option to hide bodies, I'd rather it go the length of being a full-featured stealth game. Because the gunplay here is not good, it's not even the medium of the gameplay anymore, and it's certainly not compatible with the story. Your sidekicks are good-natured hacktivist kids who just want to expose the bad guys, not kill them. I don't even remember them ever mentioning them killing anybody. The stakes in the story are so low that doesn't even seem conceivable. For example, an early mission tasks you with sabotaging the production of a Hollywood hacking movie so inaccurate it offends them. And holy shit, your crew must be some militant-ass movie fans because your guy is ready to kill and die over this movie his friends don't like. Despite how little humanity is written into these characters and their organization DedSec, they don't exactly have a lot of hostility written into them. They joke, they laugh, the whole point of the story doesn't involve life or death stakes. This is ridiculous, by the way, but the overarching narrative is that you're promoting DedSec's brand to get more followers to download their app. The whole struggle is PR and branding, so tagging their murals in impressive spots and playing harmless pranks on corrupt rich people and even breaking and entering to rob movie sets are all grand publicity stunts that fit the brand way more than massacring the security guards who happen to be working at that movie set. Regardless of what terrible tragedies you create, DedSec's follower count will just keep ticking upwards. No matter how many PR disasters you create, you always earn positive PR from it. That follower count is actually an in-game meter. That's your XP meter, and imagine how much more interesting the game would be if that meter ticked downwards, potentially taking away player upgrades for every casualty committed on your way to cultivating DedSec's brand. That's not even a far-fetched idea. Sleeping Dogs metered player behavior, and everyone loves Sleeping Dogs. Except Square Enix, who considered it a commercial failure, canceled the sequel, and shut down United Front Studios. So ironically, taking out the guns and the violence, or at least punishing them more severely, would probably hamper Watch Dogs 2's appeal to the masses in real life. It's also too much of a reminder of how safe Ubisoft still has to play it. Despite the strides they've made, it's still bogged down with these awful racing minigames and an effortless fast travel feature that makes too many methodical long-distance trips happen too often. For whatever it's worth, the multiplayer just doesn't work at all right now. And although they do try to hide it, climbing all those towers, about half of which require using a nearby scissor lift, gets really old really fast. The game's a mess of underutilized places and features, padding a worthwhile core experience. Which is why I think Watch Dogs 2 would make an excellent sale pickup later on to romp through in a weekend, but probably shouldn't be relied upon to give you a 40-hour plus time sink for now. A lot of beat-to-beat moments here come so close to realizing the potential of those 10-minute-long E3 demos, but over the course of an entire sandbox-long game experience, the repetition of it all will begin to show holes. If you go through with it and pick up Watch Dogs 2, focus on the main story. Play it stealthily and peacefully, don't dwell on the side quests about climbing towers and racing cars, and you should have yourself a grand old time.